Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth drifts through the shadows and fear rides quietly beside you. Tonight, we bring you 6 true most haunting trucker horror stories, real encounters from lonely backroads, abandoned rest stops, and stretches of asphalt where something unseen refused to stay behind. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep rolling deeper into the dark. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. Let's see who else is awake out there tonight. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. A driver named Mason took the westbound lanes like he always did, steady and deliberate, with a reefer trailer humming a soft, cold note behind him. He kept to a quiet rhythm, hands at 10 and 2, coffee in a steel cup, speed held a hair under the limit to save fuel. The desert rose up around him in wide, dark sheets, a plain of sage and stone where distant mesas rested like sleeping ships. The time blinked out 2:11 on the dash, the sort of hour when everything feels suspended. His route threaded across New Mexico into Arizona, a flat ribbon of black that seemed to float above the sand. The windshield framed a clean night. Stars hung close, and the crescent moon looked like a sliver of something peeled away. Every few miles, the interstate exhaled under a bridge, and the guardrails gleamed softly like fish scales turning in shallow water. He passed a sign for a way station and almost didn't notice it. The familiar green board stood at its post with reflective lettering, but the smaller panels beneath were strange. Open in neat, bright letters. Mason glanced at the clock again. This stretch hadn't staffed a night shift for years, not in any run he had done. Still, the lane lights were live and amber, guiding traffic toward the right with a friendly insistence. On the CB, a soft voice threaded through a wash of static. Not a bark, not the usual banter, just a clear, even tone. Unit westbound with a cold box. Come on in for a courtesy check. It came across like a sentence from a training tape. Smooth, calm, nondescript. Mason set his blinker and eased onto the ramp. The scale house sat square and tidy, lit from within by a clean white glow. He rolled to a stop on the scale deck. The digital readout blinked zeros that settled into numbers. A simple green light came on above the lane. No one stepped out. No one called again on the radio. He set his parking brake, glanced toward the office, and saw a coffee maker through the window. A chair behind the counter sat neatly tucked in. On the wall, a clock with a silver rim ticked softly, sweeping, not jumping. The sweep looked wrong with the minute hand, too smooth, like the second hand had learned a secret and slipped into another job. A small printer beside the window whirred. A slip of paper slid out and waited like a folded card. Mason rolled his window down. The air smelled like warm dust and something clean, like a new rubber mat. He took the slip. It bore no weight data, just a line. Frontage 17, next exit. Beneath it, a thin barcode that looked too narrow to scan. Mason flicked through channels. The CB gave him only soft chatter crusted with static, and a couple of bursts from distant drivers, none close. He called out anyway, gentle and respectful. No one answered. He sat a moment, listening to the reefer's compressor cycle and the faint tick of cooling metal under the hood. He pulled forward to the stop line. The light held green. The door of the office stayed still. He left the ramp, rejoined the interstate, and let his rig settle into the center lane where the smoothest track ran. He wasn't skittish, not a superstitious driver. The roads had their quirks, radio dead zones and phantom work zones where cones stood like scarecrows for weeks, even after crews had gone. But the way station glowed in his mirrors with a clean certainty that felt new, like a freshly minted coin. A half-mile ahead, a small, unfamiliar sign rose out of the green glow of his headlights. Frontage RD 17, exit 242. He had never seen it. He'd run this stretch more times than he could tally. The numbers by his thigh on the atlas never mentioned a 17. The GPS didn't either. On its map, the area looked ordinary. A pale highway ribbon, a few dirt tracks. He could pass it. He could continue straight, let the odd slip of paper join the receipts in the cup holder, and forget it. He checked his mirrors, caught the reflection of his own red marker lights marching in perfect time along the trailer's edge. Up ahead, a pair of eyes flashed from the median. A coyote or something smaller. It stood on the low ridge of gravel and watched the truck approach, completely unbothered by the rumble. As Mason drew near, the animal didn't retreat. It stepped onto the interstate, slow as a metronome, crossed, and disappeared beyond the right shoulder without a hurry, like it had a right to move there and knew the schedule. The sign for the frontage road came up. The exit lane peeled away to the right with new paint and fresh rumble strips. Mason glanced at the slip again. Frontage. 17. Next. Exit. He signaled, felt the truck change pitch and lean, and guided the tractor into the curve. The exit ramp swept down into a black shelf that widened into a frontage road running parallel to the interstate. It looked brand new. Crisp asphalt, reflectors bright as beads, no cracks or patch marks. No litter either. The brush along its edge stood untouched. In his headlight beam, the reflectors caught his light and sent it back with a perfect white, smooth and even, like teeth in an advertisement. The CB hissed and then calmed. The radio's little green screen glowed quietly. From the scale house to this lane, the air had changed. He could feel it in the way the steering wheel vibrated, less stutter from the pavement. He could hear it in the sound of the tires, singing low on something that hadn't yet learned to scatter sound. The frontage road swung past a small cement building set off the shoulder by a few yards. Its windows were blank. A faded motel sign sat crooked on two posts nearby, but its paint looked strangely untouched by time. Red arrow, blue letters. No vacancy lit in ghostly gray. Mason checked the structures as he rolled by. The curtains inside didn't move, yet he felt watched the way anyone does passing a lit window at night. Beyond the motel, the road sloped, and the interstate rose a little, lifting itself on an embankment. The two roads ran side by side for a while, companions that didn't look at each other. On the big road, hazard flashers flared a dot-dot pattern far ahead, then went out. The desert spread on, untroubled. A mile marker, a single metal tongue with a small green rectangle showing white numbers. 243. Mason compared it to his log. The count wasn't matching his memory, but didn't ring wrong either. He used the mirrors more than usual, glancing back to keep the trailer steady, watching the sides where the brush shadowed and cleared with each reflector. On the radio, the soft voice returned. Westbound unit, continue on 17 past the next overpass. Re-entry beyond the ridge. No delay. There was the same even tone, like a recorded announcement in a station. Mason paused with his hand near the mic. But he didn't lift it. He didn't need to ask questions. He had seen plenty of construction detours, shepherd drivers. Off and on without warning, he kept his speed steady and watched for an overpass. When it came, it looked like a clean cut, poured segments with pale rails and a glassy surface. No graffiti, no scarring from years of Sunday. Mason rolled underneath and caught a sound. His engine deepened for an instant to match a dissonant tone that seemed to hang in the concrete before releasing him back into open air. He thought about what would happen if he stopped. He pictured setting his brake in this clean lane, climbing down, stepping into air that hadn't learned the heat yet. He imagined the sound of his boots on the shoulder gravel, crisp, unsoftened by thousands of other steps. He didn't stop. He knew that some places want to be passed through, not touched. The frontage road curved left, up, and then, with a smooth merging angle, offered a ramp back to the interstate. A sign he didn't recognize waited on the guardrail. Reentry 17. No state crest. No sponsor, just the word, neat and black. As he took the ramp, he glimpsed the desert off to his right. A low line of dust rose in the distance, as if a column of vehicles had moved a minute earlier and the air hadn't yet settled. No vehicles sat there. Nothing cut the light, but the dust held for a breath, as if remembering. He checked his left mirror and found a gap, then slid back into the slow lane, rolling the engine into its deep, steady hum. The reefer clicked and settled. His hands eased. A glance at the clock showed 2:26. A 15-minute conversation with something that spoke in signs and light. 5 miles later, the next green highway sign straddled the night. Exit 246. Gas Food Lodging. Mason recognized the brands listed below. Old friends. The GPS map for the first time in 15 minutes moved with confidence instead of dragging along with little hesitant jumps. He took the exit and rolled into the fuel island, pulled tight alongside the yellow bollards, and set the brake. The truck stop felt like thousands of truck stops. Clean glare overhead, a light breeze that made the flags clack against their halyards, a faint smell of fryer oil sweetening the air. It didn't feel like the way station or the frontage road, which had each carried a kind of pristine hush. Inside the store, he paid for fuel and a fresh coffee. The clerk had a thick sweater on despite the warm night, and she kept her arms folded as if holding heat close. On the television behind her, a closed-captioned weather report scrolled quietly. A storm warning ticked above a small map of the state. "Must be getting something later," she said without looking up. "Rumor is a portion of westbound is slow already. Some kind of... not sure. The radio's all over the place." He nodded. "Heard anything about the way station back east?" Looked open. She glanced up, surprised. "Open? That's been shuttered for ages. No staff since before last winter." She tapped the counter with a keycard. "They keep saying they'll refurbish. It sits there like a set." Mason didn't correct her. He returned to his truck and ran his hand along the smooth paint of the door like a small ritual. In the cab, the slip from the scale house lay neatly by the dash, frontage 17 still crisp. He tucked it in the visor slowly and rolled back out toward the on-ramp. Later that morning, when the horizon had thinned from black to pale blue and the mesas stood up like islands again, he listened to a morning radio program. A segment mentioned an incident overnight. A bridge rail had failed somewhere near mile marker 242 westbound. No major injuries reported, just a backup and some long detours while crews checked the structure. Authorities thought a heavy vehicle had clipped something, loosened bolts, and a section of parapet had leaned away. They stressed how lucky the timing had been. A few minutes earlier, and someone might have met a piece of concrete at speed. Mason drove quietly. He didn't calculate the difference in minutes. He didn't need to. He drank his coffee while it cooled, a sip at a time, and watched for the shimmering distances that always trick an eye after a night run. He kept thinking about the coyote walking like a layover employee with a badge tucked into a pocket. 2 weeks later, he rolled the same route eastbound, much earlier in the night. Curiosity isn't always a tug. Sometimes it's a small tilt of the head, an angle, a willingness to let a tire drift a quarter inch toward a line. When the way station came up, he slowed and put his signal on again. The sign said closed in letters as dull as chalk. The pad on the scale looked dusty and cracked. Weeds had set up in the seams. The office windows were dark, their blinds drawn. A single moth bumped the glass and settled, exhausted. He pulled into the gravel lot and shut down to a low idle. He sat for a few minutes, listening. No clock swept. No printer purred. When he opened the door and stepped onto the step, the night met him with ordinary sounds. An insect's thin song, the far-off rush of a single vehicle on the main line, the whisper of wind making the sand run in tiny rivulets. He didn't go closer. He didn't test a handle. He stood there long enough to hear his truck's cooling fan kick on and off twice. Then he climbed back in, set his hands on the wheel, and merged out again. The slip of paper with frontage 17 stayed tucked into the visor. He kept it there like a ticket to a show that ran once and then folded. Over time, the ink faded. It didn't smear, didn't blur. It simply paled, as if the numbers were stepping back in small, polite motions, until the card was just a clean square again. He thought maybe he would tell another driver about it. That urge came and went. The road carried a million stories, and the ones that mattered seemed to stick without being told. He only found himself glancing at the green shoulder once in a while, half expecting a small, clean sign with neat black letters to show up again. When he crossed that section months later in daylight, he admired a new stretch of concrete rail where workers had repaired the overpass. The poured segments shone a bit brighter than the older ones around them. They didn't make the engine tone shift when he went underneath. Daylight chased away that trick of sound. The desert held its usual posture. Open, quiet, indifferent to schedules. Rabbits did their careful hurry across the median. The sun stood high. In his mirror, the trailer rode straight and pale. And yet, on a certain slant of afternoon, with heat making the air above the road shimmer like it was thinking, The number 17 rose in his memory, the way a mile marker will rise when it matters. Not a warning, not a demand, just a fact. A parallel way had appeared when it was needed, clean and fresh, and had set him down past an unfinished piece of night. When the subject came up, bridge repairs, odd detours, the way maps sometimes forget a change, he wouldn't say much. But he found himself treating the quiet just after 2 a.m. with an extra kind of respect. He left room in the lane like he was sitting beside a stranger in a waiting room, shoulders not touching, posture patient, letting the next call of the road announce itself in its own time. In the hum of tires, in the measured breath of the reefer unit, in the way the CB sometimes carried a voice that sounded like no one in particular, he felt the story continue to roll, not closing, just folding into the longer run. He drove through it with hands steady and eyes soft, trusting the lines to hold. Story number 2. Lena kept west through a mountain state where wind warnings live on the message boards even in quiet weather. She moved a box trailer full of folded hospital linens, the kind of load that rode politely behind a steady hand. Snow still clung to the shadowed side of the pine stands, old and granular, while the shoulders showed hints of spring dark soil, early tufts of grass that didn't yet trust the cold to stay gone. It was the hour when truck stops thin out, and the highway becomes a strip of ink brushing through valleys. Her dash lights were dimmed to a faint glow. The radio, set low, murmured a local forecast about gusts and a distant system that might or might not arrive. The wind had gone soft. A surprise this high up. A wooden sign with a green face stood by a turnout where chains get fastened in bad weather. It gave the grade a name like a song from another time, syllables that sounded carved, not printed. Lena adjusted her seat, checked her mirrors, and settled a little deeper into her calm. She was not new to these slopes. She liked the shape of night on a mountain, the way sound changes, the way engines speak plainly. The first part of the climb moved like a slow conversation. She used her lower gears, paid attention to her temperature gauge, and let the steady pull set the rhythm. Reflectors rose in neat pairs, white eyes that blinked her forward. Somewhere above, a chain of red taillights drifted in and out of curves, each unit a moving ember. She felt that comfortable aloneness long runs give, contained, focused, the world reduced to the cab, the immediate road, and the gentle count of mile markers. Ahead, an overhead message sign lit. It didn't bark a warning. It didn't announce closures. Its calm words surprised her. Night escort operation. 12 amperes. 4 amperes. Follow pilot. When actuated. She had taken this grade a dozen times and never seen this. She checked the clock. Just past 1. She watched for flashing arrows or cones. She found none. The road looked normal. Half a mile later, a compact truck glided out from a turnout on the right. It wore a low amber bar, no siren, no logos that she could read. The rear carried a rectangular panel with glowing words that shifted politely. Follow me. Keep 180 feet. Do not pass. The panel's letters weren't the default block font she was used to on highway boards. These were a little narrower, tidy, and polite. Lena eased off slightly, giving the space it asked. The little truck maintained an even pace, neither hesitant nor pushy. Its amber pattern pulsed in 3 slow beats and rested, a metronome of light. The pilot took the right lane and stayed there. The rest of the mountain, patient, leaned in to watch. The CB caught a soft crackle, and then a voice as unremarkable as a telephone menu. Westbound unit with the white box and silver stripe maintained 28 miles per hour. Keep the amber centered over your hood. Do not stop in the narrows. No call sign. No breaker. The tone had that practiced plainness that lives in instruction manuals. She glanced at her hood. The amber did sit perfectly at center. She checked her speed. 28. The pilot's brake lights never popped. It simply floated at a constant pace like it was tied to some unseen belt moving through the night. Lena held her place. Within a minute, the pilot signaled and eased onto a short ramp she had always thought was an emergency turnout for maintenance. She had never taken it. Reflectors on its guardrail shone beautifully clean, as if wiped down before this hour. The turn swept her onto a narrower shelf road that paralleled the main line a little lower on the slope. Trees closed in, tall and dark. Their trunks a neat pattern of verticals. No cones marked this spur. No crew trucks idled. The road surface was flawless, not new, not old, just unfussy, free of patches and wheel scarring. The sound in the cab changed the way it does when crossing a bridge. The tires gave a mellow note, a wooden warmth, instead of the bright hiss of interstate concrete. Lena glanced left, up toward where the main line should be. Through gaps in the trees, she saw the vague glow of headlights drifting the higher curves. The shelf road felt gently separate, like a side aisle in a theater. The pilot's board flicked once. New alignment ahead. Keep left of posts. The post arrived a row of short, square markers with glass beads that caught her headlamps and threw them back in steady white points. The beads were the old kind she remembered from childhood roads, not the newer reflectors. Each post stood at the same angle, as if set by someone measuring with a carpenter's eye rather than a machine. The CB voice returned. Maintain long following distance. Air flows crosswise at mile 6. The Narrows approach. Do not stop for any light. That is not this amber light. The words felt strange but not urgent. She nodded without thinking, then smiled at herself for nodding to a voice that could not see her. She kept the amber centered on her hood. The Narrows arrived where a rock face shouldered the valley, and the shelf pinched to a single lane. Signs the size of book covers sat on small posts. Wait here, it said, with a gentle arrow, but their shelves were folded upright, meaning not in use. The pilot did not pause. It drifted on. Sound collected differently in the Narrows. The engine note came back off the rock, smoother, as if the stone cared about tone. The amber bar painted the rock in a slow wash, then removed it. The air took on a coolness that had not been present a minute earlier, not cold enough for a window fog, just cool enough to clear her thoughts. A tight bend offered a sudden overlook of nothing the map would show. No town lights, no ranch porch bulbs, just a black bowl and the pale drift of stars. On her right, a simple wood rail kept the lane company. It was stout and unworried, stained a regular brown that matched every other piece of wood on the road. The pilot held 28. Lena breathed easily. She began to notice a pattern in the pine trunks. Every 20th tree carried a small square of reflective tape, the kind used on utility boxes, soft white with a slightly bluish cast. The squares were placed at the same height, facing into the lane. On the fourth one, she noticed a small, handwritten number with a thick marker, 4. On the fifth, 5. They kept count. She didn't know of any dot practice that numbered trees along a maintenance road. The squares looked like something added with love and neatness, not authority. At the 8th taped trunk, something like a far-off engine brake sounded from above, muffled and no threat. The pilot's panel changed. Two-way section ahead. Expect lights. Keep right to pass. This seemed impossible. The shelf felt only wide enough for one vehicle. But then the lane widened for a short stretch, as if two shoulders had pulled back to let something else through. Another set of lights appeared ahead, a pair of low ambers and a small white glow. For a second, Lena thought there was another pilot leading a truck from the opposite direction, but there was no truck behind the second pilot. The pair passed neatly, gliding through the widened part with inches to spare. The other amber bar spelled the same polite words. Follow me. The cab windows were tinted too dark to see more than a reflection. In the flash of closeness, she caught a glimpse of bugs blown into the paint on the leading edge of the opposite pilot's hood, as if it had been working a long time. The CB voice in her cab matched the moment with a new line. Shared section. Light exchange complete. The words were faintly amused, like a craftsman pleased that a joint had fit well. Lena felt no need to reply. She let the little truck ahead reclaim the center. The numbers on the tree squares rose. At 12, the shelf gave another small window out into the valley, wider this time. She could see the emptiness itself, which can be a kind of presence on a night road. She saw the moon low and playing at being a thin coin again. She saw a tilted line of old pylons in the distance, maybe relics from a long-canceled project, standing in a patient row. She had never noticed them from the interstate. Behind her, the road she had left remained faintly visible through gaps, a ghost above the trees where red tail lamps flowed like slow lava. She felt that the shelf was not shorter or longer than any practical path, just different a way that respected some old line in the mountain that the newer alignment had ignored. A tunnel mouth announced itself with a courteous light above it. No giant concrete arch, no fan noise, no sodium glare, just a rounded opening with smooth rock walls trimmed by careful handwork, and a run of small bulbs set into the ceiling like a string of pearls. The pilot's sign, tunnel clear, maintain pace. Inside, the sound changed again. Tires took on a soft patter as the surface carried little ripples the way wood carries grain. The walls reflected her headlamps in a warm, diffuse way. The ceiling bulbs paced them, making their own soft halos in the midday black. Halfway through, the CB voice offered a curious line. Some nights are longer than they are. Stay with this light while they decide. The tunnel bent slightly left and then right, gentle curves like a sway dance. It felt longer than its own space, a trick of light and patience. When she saw the second mouth open ahead, she felt, unexpectedly, a sense of gratitude. It surprised her because she had felt no fear. A small marker just outside the exit showed a family of letters in a style that had fallen out of use decades ago. It named the tunnel with the same carved-sounding word the grade had used. Below that, a date she hadn't seen on a roadside sign in ages. She did not try to add it to memory. Some facts resist being kept like a postcard. The shelf straightened, then curled sweetly back toward the brighter lanes of the main line. There was a junction without drama, a smooth ramp that climbed and blended in where a chain-off area waited with clean asphalt. The pilot drifted to the shoulder and let her go. Its panel changed once more. Good run, 635. Resume mainline. The number stopped her breath for a beat. It was her unit number, displayed plain. She hadn't used the CB to identify herself. Her door bore it. Her trailer paperwork held it. The pilot truck's tinted glass gave back only her own headlamps. The CB voice, same as before, closed the circuit. Keep the brakes cool, Lena. The mountain is soft tonight. It spoke her first name gently and without tone, like a person reading a line from paper. Then the radio, as if satisfied with its task, returned to the small sea of static and slice of distant voices. She pulled back onto the interstate where a message sign, bright and modern, repeated the earlier line. Follow pilot when actuated. No pilot sat at its base. She checked her clock. It had been 9 minutes since the pilot had glided out from the turnout. Her ELD agreed. The coffee in her steel cup had cooled more than 9 minutes would allow. A line of trucks drifted by in the left lane, like a river, momentarily leaving its bank. A feather of cloud touched the mountain's top like it didn't want to disturb anything. At the summit pullout, a state trooper car idled with lights off. The officer stood with a thermos, watching the descent as if it were a show. He didn't look busy. Everyone's brakes smelled acceptable. Everything felt ordinary. Lena took the downgrade with respect. She did not need the Jake until the second mile. The air stayed soft. She found herself keeping a careful distance behind a patch of clear air, as if the amber bar still floated ahead where no one could see it. She smiled at herself and let the smile go. The mountain lets a person do a few small, unnecessary rituals if they harm no one. At the foot of the grade, she rolled into a quieter fuel stop, the kind tucked just out of wind's way among tall pines. The attendant, an older man with a neat beard, looked like someone who had fixed and unfixed many things. He asked how the mountain had treated her. She told him it had been kind. On impulse, she mentioned the pilot car, words measured, careful not to sound like a story made to impress. He nodded like she had told him the brand of coffee she preferred. They used to do escorts when the old tunnel took too much water in thaw, he said. Stopped it when they cut the new lanes. Haven't seen those lights in years. He tapped the counter lightly, not skeptical, not credulous. Maybe the mountain keeps a few routines for times when they're needed. She bought a sandwich she would save for morning, a new pair of gloves she hadn't planned to purchase, and walked back out into air that smelled like resin and damp brush. In her cab, she scrolled back the dashcam. The recording showed the pilot's amber glow, polite as memory. The license plate area looked smudged, not blurry in the way a cheap camera blurs, but smudged like someone had rubbed it with a thumb to keep it unreadable. The speed reading, overlaid on the lower left of the video, held at 28 for 8 minutes 44 seconds. The audio caught no voice, only a high note like metal singing very quietly. She downloaded the clip and named it something forgettable. She didn't send it to anyone. She didn't delete it. She put the glove pair in the passenger footwell. She breathed. And the truck, as trucks do, made a sound like contentment at having been refueled and checked. Days later, she passed that summit eastbound under a noon sky. The sign about escorts had gone dark. The small maintenance ramp sat behind a light chain with a little white sign clipped to it. Service road closed. No public accesses. The chain had a new lock. The posts still looked recently painted. She didn't slow to stare. She noticed that the tape squares on the trees were visible even in daylight, only a few where the road came close to the shelf, as if sunlight encouraged them to show. It might have been a trick of reflection. The number on one square looked like 8 or 3. It was gone as quickly as it was there. Late in the year, after more runs and more miles, snow returned to the shadow sides again. She climbed that same grade on a night when a thin snow had dusted the pine tops like sugar. Another pilot appeared for a flatbed a mile ahead and guided it off where the chain turnouts start, amber words beating softly. Lena watched it go with the feeling one gets seeing a person step into an elevator that knows their floor without being told. The flatbed's driver might have thought a lot about it or not at all. Some things are experienced best without counting them too hard. In her log, the 9-minute detour sat flagged by the ELD as a detour divided by temporary control measure. It would not let her edit the label. Her company didn't question the line. The accountant who checked hours and fuel later wrote a note in neat typing, "Minor variance. Road work?" It felt kind to receive even that much mild curiosity on paper. She once asked an older driver who liked that mountain if he had ever been led onto the shelf. He scratched his cheek thoughtfully and said, "The old line acts like it's not done serving. It helps people along sometimes. They say you'll know whether it's for you." No one spoke about it more than was reasonable. An absence of fuss seems to be a seal some events require to keep working. She never chased the pilot by slowing to wait for it, never hoped for it on a rough night, never tried to test it with questions into the radio. She moved as a careful person moves through someone else's house in the dark, hands close to her sides, feet sure, trusting the furniture to be where it belongs. Once, descending eastbound in a spring dawn, she looked into the side mirror and saw a brief flare of amber far behind at a particular bend, there and gone like a fish turning under a ripple. It made no claim. It was only a proof of life blink sent into the world without asking for anything back. She kept that run among her quieter records, the ones not told over coffee or recorded with bravado over a CB. It didn't need weight added to it. The mountain had shared a lane for a few minutes, and she had kept pace. That felt like the entire truth. The season turned again. The wind returned to its tricks. Trucks came and went, some at night, some while the sun decided how to lay its light on long grades. And on certain nights, when the air calmed and the sound of tires lived close to the rock, the shelf road made its soft invitation, not to anyone in particular, just enough to keep something old and careful in practice. Story number 3. Raoul took the plains at night the way a person lifts a long curtain and steps into a dark room they know by heart. The fields lay wide and low as sleeping lakes. Wind turbines blinked their red lights in a slow, synchronized rhythm across the horizon, a distant conversation that never needed to raise its voice. He hauled a refrigerated trailer loaded with produce that liked the cold and a steady hand. The engine purred, the reefer clicked softly, and the lanes unspooled in pale strips beneath his headlights. He kept himself company with the AM band when the CB went quiet, rolling the dial through talk shows, farm reports, and faint music that faded in and out like breath. A traveler's information station caught his ear, one of those low-power broadcasts that tell drivers about construction and weather on a tiny piece of map. The voice had the unhurried cadence of a recording, neither cheerful nor bored. It spoke of deer crossings and a lane closure near a county line he had passed an hour earlier. The night felt gentle. A dampness in the air made the scent of cut alfalfa hang close to the pavement, earthy and clean. Every few miles, a yard light on a distant farmhouse burned its small star. He watched it the way a sailor watches buoys. He shared the road with a handful of other rigs, some pulling doubles, some with flatbeds chained down like tidy packages. They all held their speeds with the respectful distance that comes after midnight, when everyone has put their bravado away and kept only their caution. He settled in. The road signs came and went, green boards reflecting with perfect clarity, mile numbers counting down with a quiet comfort. Then, the traveler's station, the one barely above the static, cleared its throat the way older tech sometimes does. The voice returned, plain as a manual. Attention eastbound temporary advisory. Crosswinds intermittently strong near mile 207. Reduce speed. Avoid stopping on overpasses during dust movement. Repeat. Avoid stopping on overpasses. The warning fit the night. He could feel a mischievous breeze pushing at his trailer's tall sides in brief, testing nudges. He eased a couple miles per hour off his pace and kept both hands on the wheel. The advisory ended. The station fell back into a soft bed of static, and a familiar song drifted by from another place on the dial, like a memory passing under a door. A minute later, the same voice came back with a line that did not feel public. Refrigerated unit white with navy stripe, ladder on rear door, alternate safety corridor available. If needed, maintain current lane until directed. Raoul's rig wore a navy stripe. The ladder on the back rose straight and clean. Plenty of refrigerated units fit that description, and he knew it. He glanced at the mirrors as if to confirm his own existence, saw his red marker lights marching dutifully along the trailer's edge, and told himself that the advisory was wide enough to sit on any number of trucks with confidence. Still, the words hung in the cab like a visitor waiting near the door. The lane rose for a gentle overpass, nothing dramatic. Just a long bridge over a dry creek that held a small braid of water this time of year. As he climbed, the world ahead became thin with dust, not the thick brown wall that storms throw, only a pale veil. The turbine's red blinks dulled behind it. He kept his eyes soft and steady. The dust rippled across the beams of his headlights like gauze in water. Then, out of the dim, came a sign unlike the others. A modest, portable board with a low glow, like a work zone arrow that had decided not to insist. 2 words appeared in a neat, even font. Safety corridor. Beneath them, keep right. A small white arrow pointed to a lane that felt like just more of the interstate, as tidy as the rest. He could have ignored it. He believed in ignoring odd things when they asked for more than they gave. But the advisory's phrasing the latter, the stripe bothered him in a small, reasonable way. He kept right. The dust pulled itself across the overpass with a steady shrug of wind. Somewhere behind him, a vehicle tapped its brake lights twice the quick, polite code of thanks or warning, and then settled again. The feeling that the bridge wanted to be crossed in one unbroken motion, like a sentence read without a breath taken in the wrong place, grew in him. The traveler's voice slipped back inside the cab, as if it had been waiting just outside. Do not stop on elevated structures during dust movement. If visibility degrades, maintain low speed. Should lights appear behind you at an unusual distance, maintain course. Unusual distance. He let the words sit for what they were. Strange and specific. The dust thinned as he eased down the other side of the crossing. For a long minute, the planes returned to their patient darkness. Then the radio voice changed its script. Names on file eastbound last reported. Status check requested. The station read them in a measured line, as if crossing them off a morning list. Dell, Marcus, Joe, R. Vera, call in if safe. Dispatch holding. It wasn't a list of call signs. It wasn't company. It was first names and part of surnames with small pauses like pencil taps between them. It ended with a line that nearly stopped his breath. Unknown status, R. Luna. Check in at next call point. Use roadside phone if no signal. He drove 3 slow breaths before he realized his hands had tightened. Raoul Luna, R. Luna, sat plain in the cab with him now, floating somewhere above the dashboard like a note hung on a string. His phone had full bars. Dispatch knew his route. None of that mattered to the voice and its polite insistence on another era's habit. He told himself the same thing he would tell anyone hearing their name in a travel advisory. Coincidence layered onto an old recording. How many are Lunas? How many Lunas in the world? The road holds names like stones hold heat. Many drivers have carried the combinations that would make a radio stumble into them. A sign for a wayside appeared at the right, Blue Finch Lookout, with a simple icon of a picnic table. He had never used it, just a simple pull-out with a couple of trash cans and a little view shelf looking over a low river valley. Tonight, its single sodium lamp burned a pale apricot glow against the dust's quiet drift. A payphone stood by the tidy, low brick shelter like a prop from a museum display. Brushed metal, a black handset, buttons that shone dimly under their plastic. His phone vibrated once on the console. For a second, he thought dispatch had called. But the screen remained blank. Then another sound came, too soft for what it was, and yet perfectly clear. The payphone beside the little shelter began to ring. The sound was pure, bell-like, not electronic, a note from a deeper drawer. He passed without signaling to pull in. Plenty of things ring in the night. Plenty of things ask for attention. His lane and his schedule argued for the simple act of passing by. The traveler's station did not scold. It offered nothing but a newly precise line. Bluefinch call point now active. R. Luna. If using cellular, dial the posted 10-digit and wait for tone. He glanced at the phone icon on the shelter. There was no posted number on its small sign from what he could see while moving. The payphone's business panel would list a number. He did not plan to find it. He let the notion go with a breath and put a little more patience into his following distance behind the small, empty stretch of road ahead. Dust gathered again in a gentle wave as the land dipped. The turbine's lights vanished for full seconds at a time and reappeared in synchronized blinks, reassuring in their beat. The station's voice returned with the tone of a person who has moved one step closer so quiet words can be shared. Approaching mile 201. Visibility drops expected at bridge. Reduce speed to 4 to 5. Keep left lane open. Do not stop on structure. Mile 201 came and slid under his wheels like a little bell being rung. The world narrowed. Headlight beams hit a living thing, a dancing sheet of powdered soil pushed up by some far farmer to sing his field. Strange at this hour, but not impossible. The sheet crossed the highway like a curtain being dragged from a stage into the wings. Taillights winked up ahead. The silhouette of a rig, box trailer like his, slowed more abruptly than was wise. Its brake light stuck on, bright and pleading. In the dust, for a breath, it looked as if the driver had lost the shoulder line and drifted onto the bridge lip. Raoul gave up more speed, felt the trailer push lightly, felt the gentle give in the tractor's front tires as they gripped and stayed true. The other driver corrected, found the track again. The dust loosened and lifted in a slow incline off the road. For a moment, the air seemed to glow with the minerals it carried, each piece of the plane floating and then settling back to its place. He exhaled. The station said nothing. The turbines blinked their given pattern. The other rig moved onward with an embarrassed steadiness, like someone recovering in a hallway after tripping alone. Half a mile later, the traveler's voice returned with a sentence that made less sense and more sense at once. Call received. Status noted. Resume standard operation. Repeat. Resume standard operation. He checked his mirrors, then his clock, then the small green glow of his cruise setting. Everything interested in maintaining life in its simple rhythm turned quietly forward. He forgot the payphone as the towns ahead began to whisper their presence, older gas stations with their canopy lights half lit, a grain elevator with a painted emblem of a bird once new and bright. At a fuel stop tucked off a junction, he rolled into the lane labeled trucks, set his brake, and let the engine idle down to a calmer note. The clerk, a tired-looking man with a clean shirt and radio news murmuring beside the lottery ticket display, asked how the wind had been. Raoul told him it had pushed, and then quit. He did not mention the payphone. He didn't need to hear the reasonable explanations people offer to each other at this hour, the kind that make both speakers feel better and neither wiser. He used the restroom and walked back out beneath the clean glare of sodium lights. His breath fogged a little in the mild cold. The AM band, left low in the cab, sent a single steady tone like a test pattern that can't decide whether to arrive or leave. Back on the interstate, the traveler's station faded and then returned, this time with a voice that seemed older by a haircut. It gave a date, not the day he was living, but one many years earlier. Advisory log March 18th, 83. Dust lanes expected mid-valley. Do not stop on bridges. Verify with county when passing. A minute later, a lower voice, recorded the way voices were recorded when tape still mattered, added, call points active. Finch. Corn Hollow. Green Spur. Use roadside units, if radio weak. The stations had archives, he knew. They played loops when no one updated them. Sometimes old tapes drifted through the night and washed up on unrelated shores. He told himself this while his hands held perfectly smooth lines through the small curves, while the reefer settled, while the road kept talking to the tires the way old friends speak softly, with only the necessary words. Corn Hollow arrived as a tiny exit with a single aging sign. Its rest area, if that's what it had been, showed only a cement pad and 2 trash cans, both strapped and clean. No payphone, no lamp, nothing to ring. The traveler station went silent for a stretch long enough to feel like a choice, not a failure. When it came back, the voice was modern again. "Thank you for your patience," it said, and there was a warmth in the phrase as if this small system of low power and limits had decided to be kind. He cleared the valley near dawn. Pink lay low on the horizon like someone had set a thin ribbon there. The turbine's lights clicked off one by one. Crows in groups of 3 fluttered from fence posts. The fields changed their texture under the light. What had been dark and uniform resolved into lines and ruts, and the white of old limestone at the edges. When he rolled into a bigger town for breakfast, he sat at a counter where coffee came in a thick white mug, and the eggs looked like they had been cooked slowly by someone thinking about something else. The waitress spoke, as if choosing careful words made them more durable. He asked if the traveler station had good coverage out here. "That one," she said, puzzled and amiable. "Haven't heard it in a long time. Tower got hit in a storm last spring. They say it's off till they replace something. Antenna, I think." She left to refill a cup down the way, then returned. "Sometimes my brother swears it will cut through on his way to the river when he fishes before work. He'll say it tells him when the sheriff's checking tags." She smiled like people do when they admit a small, unimportant belief. Raoul tipped well and returned to his rig. He drove the rest of the day without the radio. The sound of the engine and the road made a satisfactory music that the morning sun recognized and approved. Weeks later, he found himself again on that stretch of plains at night, not seeking anything, not avoiding anything. The AM band, turned low out of habit, held a soft hiss. Static rose and fell like breaths sleeping people take, little variations that reassure when you notice them. The traveler station waited on the dial out there somewhere. It would speak if it had to. It would remain courteous even if it never did again. On that second passing, the dust lay down and stayed put. No overpass asked to be crossed without hesitation. The turbines blinked their steady rhythm as if teaching time. The place where Bluefinch Lookout had been wore only a small rectangle of lighter pavement where a shelter once stood. The posts for a sign remained, neatly cut off at knee height, their ends smooth, as if sealed. He slowed slightly as he drew level without deciding to do so, then gently returned to pace. The radio made no call, read no names. The valley simply held him the way an ample chair holds a careful person. Sometimes, long after, on nights when the road felt thinner than usual, he would hear a solitary phone ringing in his memory, not accusing, not pleading, a soft bell note, timing itself against his heartbeat. He kept his hands steady and his eyes calm. He remembered the directions delivered in that flat, kind voice, and the way the dust had drawn itself like a curtain, and then, without fuss, left the stage. When other drivers at a counter traded stories, he kept this one trimmed. He would say, if pressed, that old systems sometimes act like they never got the memo. He would say that he takes bridges in one smooth line when conditions shift, and that luck often sounds like instructions. He did not argue with anyone who preferred explanations, and he did not offer any to those who preferred none. Once, passing the turbines at an hour when they made their red marks across a very dark sky, the station came alive again with a single sentence, spoken by the voice he remembered from that night. "Thank you, R. Luna. Keep it moving." It was the gentle way a crossing guard waves you through when no car is coming, a small blessing in a place that does not hand them out often. He smiled, and let the smile go so that his face could return to the serious and business of driving. The road asked nothing more than that, and he gave it, mile after mile, through the gentle bowl of the plains that had been kind and careful once, when he had needed it most. Story number 4. Nora took the turnpike at an hour, when the toll booths looked like lanterns along a river. Her trailer carried cardboard cartons of ceramic mugs, stacked and banded, a light load compared to steel or stone, but tall enough to mind the wind. A light drizzle had left the pavement as dark as polished anthracite, and the lines shone a clean white all the way to the horizon. The tollway in this state came with those big service plazas straddling both directions, bright islands and long stretches where exits were scarce. She liked them. Reliable coffee, wide lots, a little bridge of glass hung over the lanes where, if a person had a minute, They could look down and watch headlights sliding under like fish. She pulled in at 2:38 a.m., set the brake, and let the engine idle down into a soft, content thrum. The lot was a checkerboard of sleeping rigs and late arrivals trolling for a slot. Nora eased into a space along the outer row near a stand of small trees planted in a neat rectangle. Their leaves whispered even with the lightest breeze. The plaza building glowed warm through a spring mist, its letters bold and friendly. She grabbed her jacket and stepped down, boots touching damp asphalt with a sound like quiet applause. Inside, the place showed its late hour. A janitor cart sat like a thoughtful animal beside a pillar. One sandwich counter was closed, stools flipped upside down. The coffee kiosks still hummed. The overhead music was barely there, only the rise and fall of a familiar melody too thin to identify. Nora poured a coffee, added exactly 2 creamers like she always did, and turned toward the glass bridge that crossed the lanes. The bridge was empty. The night made it a dim aquarium. Looking down, she expected a constant line of traffic, even at this hour eastbound, westbound, the endless freight that keeps everything ticking. Instead, the road under her paused in a way that looked intentional, as if a conductor had held a baton in the air and told an orchestra to wait for a breath. Headlights in the distance moved, but slow. The LED face of an overhead message board glowed with a single line. Night operations. Reduced flow. The phrasing was odd. Reduced flow sounded like a patient nurse talking about a faucet, not a highway. A chime sounded nearly too soft to hear. Not the metallic ding the storefronts used for attention, but something round and warm, like a glass rim touched by a fingertip. The lights atop the bridge dimmed slightly, and the long room shifted its mood from cafeteria bright to something like a library. A voice followed, pleasant and unhurried. Night cycle will begin momentarily. Please remain inside the structure. Doors will release at completion. The words were too gentle to alarm. Nora, who had seen plenty of maintenance closures and rolling slowdowns, put her coffee on the rail and stared down through the glass. The lanes looked wider at night, the shoulders broader, a stage with its curtains drawn back. Below, a small fleet of yellow pickups eased into view at the far horizon, far smaller than the semis, and yet somehow not out of place. They stopped neatly in the right shoulders at measured intervals, as if taking up assigned spots. Amber bars on their roofs pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Across the bridge, a cleaner in navy pants pushed a quiet machine that whispered over the tiles, its small brushes catching bits of light. The worker passed her without looking up, steady and calm, a patch on the sleeve showing the Turnpike Authority's emblem in an old style Nora hadn't seen in years. The air smelled faintly of citrus and rain. Another chime. Nora glanced back toward the automatic doors that led to the lot. They had slid closed together with slow, ceremonial confidence, and a small panel beside them lit an icon of a lock. No alarm. No fuss. Just a pause that had decided to be official. Her phone had bars. Text trickled in from a group chat that ran like a lazy river among a handful of drivers from her company. A sticker. A comment about pie at a diner 2 states away. A photo of a dawn sky pinned from last week. No one mentioned this plaza or any night cycle. Nora put the phone away and returned to watching the lanes under her. A digital clock above the bridge slid its minutes with comforting honesty. 2:40. 2:41. The second hand ticked, neither rushed nor hesitant. She sipped coffee and let the heat sit in her chest. In the distance, beyond the yellow pickups, a figure the size of a grain of rice moved in the exact center of the westbound lanes. It grew into the shape of a larger service truck with a tall folded sign on its bed. At a spot exactly halfway between the near and far horizons, it stopped. The sign rose like a clean page being set on an easel. Its LEDs lit in a gentle cadence. Hazard ahead. The first line read. Reduced flow. The words didn't bark. They flowed, as promised. The floor trembled a little under Nora's feet, not with force, but with the kind of resonance that buildings accept and modulate the way a theater holds applause, the way a bridge rides the bounce of footsteps, the way a ship handles waves. She thought of the glass under her boots and stepped back 1 pace without thinking. The cleaner glided on, humming to themselves in a tune that seemed to match the chime from before. On the far end of the bridge, past the food counters and the closed bookstore, an older wall display glowed in a quiet corner. She hadn't noticed it. It held a long panel of laminated cards behind glass, each listing dates, weather notes, and maintenance events, as if the building kept a diary in neat block letters. She wandered over. The entries ran back decades. March 18, high winds, ramp closures. April 3, night cycle initiated for pavement low. The phrase made her smile. Pavement low. As if the road needed to breathe like a person. Tonight's card had been slid in place at the end. It read, April light drizzle, calm air. Night cycle, 2:42 to 2:56. Reason, bridge hold. East of marker, 174. Doors close. Doors release. A precise calm fell across the bridge. Nora returned to the glass rail. Below, a state trooper eased into the left lane, rolled forward until exactly even with the midpoint service truck, and stopped. Its light bar didn't flare, only glowed like a sleeping thing. Past them, the highway drew itself into a long, visible quiet. A pair of semis in the far lane slowed and settled side by side, like horses gently brought to a walk. An announcement sounded again. Please remain inside the bridge. This is a short hold. The voice had the quality of a friendly docent at a museum guiding a small tour away from a closed wing, regretful but confident that the rest of the building would satisfy. Nora glanced along the bridge. She was not alone. A woman in a bright scarf sat on a bench texting. A man in a baseball cap stood with a toddler on his hip, pointing at the empty road like it was a parade. Farther down, an older driver, Nora, recognized him distantly from truck stops and way stations. A face that had aged with the road instead of despite it nodded to her as their eyes met, then returned to his silent study of the lanes. Down below, a small something moved across eastbound, low and even, like a ripple pulled by a hand across a tablecloth. It wasn't water. It wasn't fog. It had the look of something barely attached to the air at all, like chaff, or petals, or a million bits of paper the size of seeds, all moving with the same opinion. It rode the lanes in a neat band, like a white seam stitched on black cloth. It passed under the bridge and kept going, making a straight line toward a dark line of trees in the distance. The yellow trucks did not interrupt it. The trooper did not chase it. The big rigs idling in place did not argue with it by revving. The seam went where it was going, and the road led it. Nora understood suddenly, and with the kind of certainty that feels like having been told the answer just before thinking it. The hold wasn't for work crews or machinery. It was for that strange forward movement the air had decided on, narrow as a strap and indifferent to everything but its own completion. Once, years ago, she had seen a close, dense swarm of migrating insects cross a county road like smoke, and the county had put up temporary signs for a week because drivers had panicked in patches of it, braking hard, swerving, confused by a living haze. She thought of that now, and exhaled, relieved to be above, not inside, the night's ribbon. The ribbon passed. The service truck folded its sign with slow, respectful motions. The trooper rolled forward a few feet and stopped again. As if asking one last question, the road answered in the affirmative. The yellow pickups extinguished their amber glows in a ripple. The towers of LED on the message board cleared themselves and then, with a small pause, wrote, "Thank you for your patience." The gentle chime returned. The lock icon beside the doors flashed, then faded. The doors slid open. The clock read 2:56. The cleaner parked the machine beside the big pillar, as if it had just taken a long walk, patted it affectionately, and left it. Nora picked up her coffee and stepped back into the plaza's main hall. The bakery, counter lights came up one step, bright enough now to make the trays shine. The woman with the scarf lifted her child higher, said something in a voice as calm as the buildings, and pointed toward the candy aisle. The older driver tipped 2 fingers from his cap and headed toward the doors leading to the west lot. Nora followed the flow. Outside, the drizzle had softened itself to a fine mist. The trees by the lot edge made a sound like someone turning pages slowly. She walked to her rig with that peculiar feeling a person gets after an elevator ride that stops on the right floor in a building they don't know. Surprise that the world hasn't noticeably changed. Relief that it hasn't. As Nora climbed into the cab, Another driver a few spots down swung his door open and stood on his step, one hand on the handle. He called across without raising his voice too much. "You see that?" His tone carried ordinary curiosity, not hunger for a story. She nodded. "Night cycle," he said, like confirming a phrase in a language both of them knew just enough of. "Haven't caught one in years. It's nicer to be inside the glass when they do it." She smiled and agreed. He went back inside. Engines turned over here and there, as if an entire row had finally exhaled after holding its breath. Eastbound under the bridge, headlights began to move again. The glass above caught their glow, made it long and communal, then let it go. Nora eased out, checked her mirrors, and rolled to the ramp. She checked her phone. A small alert had arrived during the hold. Not a text, just a weather push. Temporary visibility reduction east of mile 174. Proceed with caution. She merged into the right lane, slipped under the bridge where the light had a slight warmer tone from the glass overhead, and settled at a measured pace. The trailers ahead carried their familiar palette of company names, the bread and butter and bricks of a country that loves its morning shelves neat. A few miles east, she passed something she wouldn't have noticed had she not been looking. A long line on the shoulder where the night's ribbon had touched. A lingering thin stripe of whatever it carried down. Chuff. Seed fluff caught against the edge and stacked like notes on a staff. It would blow away soon. Right now, it gave the shoulder a pale seam. The wind gave it a small clap, and let it be. Past mile 174, a pair of highway workers in reflective jackets stood by a pickup, heads together, checking a ledger on a clipboard. Pens, moving in neat, slow cooperation. One of them glanced up as Nora rolled by and lifted a hand, a wave not directed at her specifically but at the entire flowing line. She lifted a few fingers off the wheel on reflex, a driver's benediction. She didn't touch her radio. She let the reefer hum its precise cycle. In the side mirror, the Plaza Bridge shrank to a low bright band across the lanes, then to a pearl. The night returned to its regular bloom and fade. At the first toll gantry down the line, an overhead screen scrolled the usual reminders. Keep moving, lanes open, receipts online, but then cleared to a single line for a moment. Safe run. The words were a shade kinder than the machinery needed to be. She made her delivery a little after dawn, a warehouse that spent its earliest hours quiet and civilized, with a receiving clerk who spoke slowly to keep the morning gentle. He asked how the turnpike had treated her. She said it had been careful. He nodded like this was a choice the road could make when it wanted to. Weeks later, on a different night and a different run, she reached a plaza further west, one without a bridge, but with a broad set of windows that looked down on a curved on-ramp like a balcony. The wall display by the restrooms held a laminated card there too, under a glass lock. Its neat line for that date said, "Night cycle, 311 to 322. Reason. Fog pocket, creek crossing hold. Doors close, doors release." The phrasing had traveled. Maybe these plazas were siblings, sharing habits and a way of speaking that served them well. A driver she didn't know leaned on the rail and sipped tea from a ceramic mug that looked suspiciously like one of the ones Nora had hauled. He said, not looking at her, "My uncle worked maintenance here years ago. Said sometimes the road asks to be left alone for 12 minutes so it can do its thinking. Said the plazas help it pretend to be a building while it does." Nora didn't ask for a source, a union, a supervisor's name. She didn't need a dotted line leading to a document. The turnpike had its own archive, visible and invisible, chimes and laminated cards, and a clock that told the truth. She stood a while, finished her coffee, and took the stairs back down, careful on wet treads. On nights afterward, if the overhead sign read "Night Operations," or the lights inside a glass bridge dimmed by 1 degree, she felt a small easing in her chest. It meant the road was paying attention in the odd hours when human attention frays. It would not make the world less unpredictable. It would not stop a deer from leaping or a strap from coming loose. But for a few measured minutes, a long structure could remember it was made up of decisions and care, and everyone on it could wait together in decent quiet. Once, months later, she passed under one of those bridges when a hold had begun. The doors would have been closed if she had tried to park. Heading east with steady speed, she watched as the yellow pickups took their marks like chess pieces. Overhead, a row of small glass panels in the bridge caught the ambient light and gave it a honeyed tone. The digital sign wrote, "Reduced flow. Thank you." She pressed the wheel, not hard, just a touch of hand to material, as if greeting something. The road said nothing back, of course. It moved in its own style, flexible and precise, letting the living and the built cross each other with as little harm as possible. When the hold released and the speed rose by a notch, she felt only that old, good feeling, timing handled with grace. It crests and falls. It keeps you. Story number 5. Amaya ran the coastal route at an hour when the marsh watched everything with patient eyes. The water lay flat as graphite, a muted plate between low islands of reeds. Her trailer hauled food-grade syrup, slow and heavy, the kind of load that made a rig behave like a thoughtful animal, steady in the wind, careful on a slope, content if given rhythm. Fog came in soft bands across the causeway, laid down by a breeze that seemed to think in turns. A distant horn, the kind set on channel markers for boat traffic, let out a long, woolen note every minute, then rested as if to listen. She kept the NOAA weather band on low in the background. It delivered readings that felt like cabin talk rather than broadcast. Visibility measured in fractions of miles. Tide charts muttered like recipes. Small craft advisories spoken with the same patience as a librarian locating a book. Piers appeared and disappeared in the fog at the limit of her lights. Just the posts, dark chopsticks stuck in brackish soup. Nothing tethered to them at this hour. The route took her along a ribbon of concrete set on short, close-set pilings, elbowing through channels and inlets until it fed into a swing bridge over the ship canal. Daytime traffic there could snarl when a barge forced the span to open. At night, she usually rolled straight through. A green sign, reflective and practical, warned in all caps, "Swing bridge ahead may open without notice, use caution." Underneath, Marine CH9, for bridge. She didn't have Marine VHF, just the weather radio and the CB, but it was enough to feel included in the flow. Her dash clock read 2:19. The cab lights were dim, tuned down until they were just outlines. She had turned off the radio's scan and left it to coast on the weather feed. In the intervals, the sound of the truck filled the cab. Low engine hum, faint hiss of tires on damp concrete. The soft taps that syrup sometimes made in the tank walls when grade and speed agreed. A fog bank, this one thicker than the last, climbed onto the causeway like a creature that preferred lying across warm surfaces. The world narrowed to the edge of her lights, and the small brightness of reflectors set into the shoulders. The channel's horn sounded its note. She answered, not with her air horns, but by lifting her foot 1 degree, making the truck's song a little lower, as a sign of respect, in a place that liked measured moves. The weather voice, placid as always, changed its script. "Bridge advisory for the canal at mile marker 13, it said. Hold at white post 50. 2 when foghorn repeats odd pattern. Do not cross under open span." Amaya frowned. The message sounded like something written for boats. Odd pattern? The horn had been regular. A second later, as if a stage manager had signaled a cue, the horn changed. Instead of 1 long note per minute, it made a long note, then 2 short ones, then rested a returning wave said to a shoreline. The CB was quiet. The NOAA voice was cool. The channel ahead carried the same light as the rest of the causeway. No hazard flashes, no work trucks, just the patient glow of a place used to darkness. Amaya eased her speed down 4 miles per hour and watched for a white post she had never needed to notice. When it arrived, she knew it without guessing. The coast had many signs, green for directions, brown for parks, black and yellow to warn. This was a white painted square post set on the right shoulder like a fence slat, waist high, with a simple number hand-lettered on it in neat strokes. 52. A small metal disc, the kind used on trails to show an arrow, had been bolted above the number, but its symbol had worn away under weather and salt. The edge of the causeway there widened by the span of a pickup truck. A tiny turnout shouldered into the marsh grasses, their wet tips combed in the same direction by the wind. The horn gave the odd pattern again, long, short, and somewhere in the string of low industrial light ahead, a square window high over the canal brightened. The bridge tender's house, she realized, the little room on stilts where someone watched the water and the road and made things move or not move. The light wasn't white. It had the warm color of an older bulb, the kind that makes wood look cozier. Her right hand went to the indicator before she decided to signal. The truck drifted into the turnout. She set her brake but left the engine idling. The load thanked her by losing the faint, irregular tapping it had been making. She put her hazards on and watched their red bursts tint the fog a soft rose. On the weather band, a human voice came through that was not the NOAA meteorologist, nor a trooper, nor a dispatcher. It sounded like a person a generation older, one with practice keeping their voice even over a radio. "Eastbound tanker with the dark cab and silver elbows, you're good where you are," the voice said. "Hold at 52. The arms are sticky on nights like this. Do not trust them. Do not trust the lamps." The words walked in careful steps. The tone was neither stern nor friendly. It was resolved. Amaya looked up the causeway to where the swing bridge must be. The barrier arms were indeed up. The red lamps at their tips burned steadily. No signs flashed. If she hadn't heard the radio voice, she would have proceeded and found a wet absence where the span should be. She thumbed the CB to channel 19. "Anyone else catching that?" she asked. Not excited, not calm. Just present. A reply came from behind, a mile or less back an old cab over, with a voice that carried miles of tired patience. "Copy," he said. "Same as a few years back. When the horn goes odd, hold at the white post. You don't want to be on that deck when they start their thinking." He meant the bridge, but he said it as if it had its own mental calendar. The fog thickened in clever pockets, then drew back in a puff, like a person testing their breath on a window. On the dark water under the causeway, something moved that was not wind. It was a push, a slow shoulder in the current, distinct from the tide's patient tug. It made a shape in nothing, long and low, moving with the weight of permission. The bridge tender's house on its high frame showed the silhouette of a figure shifting inside. A lamp slid across a wall, a rectangle moving and settling. The horn's odd pattern continued. Amaya sat with her hands quiet on the wheel and let the truck be still. Her ELD ticked its minutes and labeled them in pale letters she would see later. Delay bridge, divided by weather. It did this little kindness without asking. A string of low blue LEDs lit on the side of the swing span, tracing a line that slowly rotated. The entire bridge moved so slowly at first that it looked like a trick of fog. Then surely, the deck drifted away from itself, dividing the center like a pair of doors tested for the first time after a long winter. The barrier arms at each end remained raised as if in error, claiming the road as open while the road chose to be interrupted. The sticky part the radio voice had mentioned was plain. The lamps did not hesitate to lie. In that careful silence, Amaya thought of things that take their turn without being asked, migrating schools that use ancient paths. The way rushes bend together when a certain breeze remembers a long line. The way old channels ask to be cleared on a schedule no one posts on the internet. She felt no fear, only a respectful smallness that comes with being included in a routine not meant for her kind. The water took a deeper breath. A low sound rose from the canal, not a motor, not a rig's quadratic rumble, but something like cloth being unfurled across a room larger than the house of any human. Out in the fog, a white shape lifted. It might have been a heron's wing or a piece of foam turned in a curl. Then it was gone, replaced by the simple fact of movement itself, something or nothing passing under in a long, consistent push. A rope somewhere knocked once against a wooden post and was silent again. The tender's window showed the silhouette reaching up, as if to tip an unseen cap, or to work a lever, or to stretch after a long vigil. The CB crackled. The cab over behind her spoke in a tone that implied a small smile. "Stay put, sister. They're doing their courtesy." He didn't say to what. He didn't need to. On the weather band, a channel not meant for any of this, the old voice offered one more line, soft enough that she had to lean toward the speaker. "We appreciate the hold. When the horn goes back to even, you'll have your lane." Not 30 seconds later, the pattern changed. One long note per minute returned. The patient metronome of a fog station laid out years earlier. The blue LEDs on the span's edge completed their slow rotation and came to rest on a straight line. The sticky barrier arms hesitated, dipped halfway, raised again like a person reconsidering a nod, then finally dropped to block the lanes with creaks that made them sound older than they were. After a little pause, they rose to reveal the deck whole as if nothing had ever been asked of it. Amaya clicked off her hazards, edged forward, and felt the minute flex of the bridge under her tires, not a bounce, just an acknowledgement that two big structures were speaking through contact. She kept her speed down, eyes soft for whatever else the fog might try. As she passed under the tender house, she glanced up and saw the figure in the window, head tilted, looking not at her but at the opening mechanism's gauge, a little needle on a round dial that must have made sense to one person in that moment. A small lamp near the window held a warm yellow shade crocheted by some distant relative, out of place and welcome. On the far side, the causeway widened into a pull-off where fishers parked trucks at dawn to watch the shrimp boats leave. A low building there, bait and sandwiches, stacked coolers, postcards bleached pale by sun kept a single porch light lit. It painted the fog with an amber circle. She put on her turn signal without thinking and rolled in. The cabover followed and idled beside her. They both let their parking brakes hiss, and the fog held their red taillights like embers. Inside, a man with a neat beard and a windbreaker that had seen 2 decades of seasons set fresh coffee on a counter, while a small TV played a fishing report with the sound low. He asked if they'd come through while the bridge took its pause. Amaya nodded. The cabover driver lifted 2 fingers in half a wave and headed toward the back to wash his hands. "They say it does that when bank fog sits wrong on the canal," the man said. "Sticky arms. Telltales don't tell. The old tender set up a patch into the weather band years ago, so a body with a radio could be told to hold. Not supposed to, but it does the job." "How long's it been like that?" Amaya asked. Her voice felt normal for the first time in 10 minutes. She took the offered coffee, just to have something warm in her hand. The man considered. "As long as I've been here, and since my father too." He smiled at a memory. He was tender for a while, kept a ledger, said it wasn't just mechanics. Said some nights, the canal remembers when big moves happened and opens whether or not anything calls. He'd hold traffic anyway, just in case the memory's late. He'd say, "Courtesy goes both ways. We hold for what has to pass, seen or not." Amaya looked past him to a wall where old photographs hung, their edges curled, frames mismatched. In one, a barge moved through an open swing span, a tug low and stout pushing a load of cut pine. In another, a fog stood so thick over the canal that the only lights were 2 faint dots and the reflection of the swinghouse window. Another image showed a pair of white posts with black numbers halfway to the horizon, each with a different number. One of them said 52. The sign maker's hand looked identical to the one she had just seen on the shoulder. Neat, even, unhurried. The cabover driver came back. He scratched the back of his neck and grinned a small grin at the counterman. "Smelled like river in there," he said. "Deep river, not just tide." He poured sugar into a paper cup and stirred without clinking the stirrer against the sides. "River under the road, boats under the fog, rules under the rules," the counterman said. "Everything in layers." Amaya took her coffee back to the cab and sat with the door open a minute to cool the air. The horn resumed its one-note duty. Her phone, on the console, showed a small pop-up from a traffic app. "Drawbridge malfunction at Canal MM13. Expect brief delays." The note had been time-stamped 1 minute before she had pulled into the pull-off. The world had noticed in its own way. On her dash cam, the barrier arms were plain in their unwilling truth. Up when the deck had been opening, down when it was closed, then up again. The little indicator at the bottom of the screen showed her speed turning from 38 to 0, with the slow reduction of a person setting down a heavy book. The audio had caught the horn's odd pattern cleanly. It had also caught, faint and familiar, the voice on the weather band. It recorded a single, barely audible phrase, spoken just as the lights had steadied. "Thank you." No call sign, no formalities. A polite sentence placed in the right space, then gone. She named the video with the date and let it sit on the card. She did not feel compelled to share it. Stories told too many times in the wrong rooms stop holding their shape. Fog thinned. The marsh dark returned to its ordinary texture, a weave of shadow and light. The causeway led on toward a town where her load would be turned into something sweet, bottled, and sent out again into the same world on different schedules. The cabover rolled first, his marker lights friendly in retreat. Amaya followed, putting her truck back into that version of night where the line between seen and known is wide, and respected when it needs to be. A few days later, She found herself eastbound on the same route under a brisk dawn. The swing house window was open. A person in a pale shirt set a mug on the sill and leaned to watch a pair of small fishing boats bump past each other like acquaintances at a tight door. The barrier arms looked freshly greased. The white posts along the causeway kept their quiet numbers. The marsh birds did their efficient work, heads down, legs quick. At the bait and coffee place, a chalkboard by the register carried a neat list of items in tidy handwriting. Shrimp morning 7-9, live crabs when available, ice by the bag, coffee in cups and thermoses. Drawbridge alerts on weather band when needed. The last line had a little smile drawn beside it, as if acknowledging that, when needed, covered a wide swath of the human condition. In other towns, on other nights, she would tell as much of the story as a conversation required, and no more. If pressed, she would admit that the oddest part had not been the fog or the open span or the radio voice, using a frequency that should have belonged to barometric pressure and rainfall. The oddest part had been the specific safety of the white post, the way a number painted by a hand like any other would sit you down in the one right place in a very large space and keep you from harm as neatly as a reserved chair in the front row. Once, months after, she passed the canal on a bright noon when the tide ran high and the wind moved in sheets, and she saw a small object snagged at a piling under the bridge, a length of rope with a rusted hook, the kind a barge tie might use. It tapped softly against the wood with each small slap of wake. The swing house window's lamp, unlit, wore its yellow shade. The horn's mount stood still. The posts remained. Nothing needed her to hold. She crossed at speed and thought of how many hands and voices and quietly kept rules were wrapped into one night's decision to pause the world. The coast went on turning its own pages. Fog, salt, gulls scolding low water, egrets measuring distance with careful steps. Trucks moved, boats moved, tides moved. A patient structure over water did its old job with a small update tucked into its bones. A voice in the sideband where a person who listened carefully could receive a single, tailored instruction. Hold here. Now thank you. Amaya kept the weather band on more often after that. She found comfort in the cadence even when it only talked about swell heights and barometric pressure changes over a distant sound. Some nights, it would fall silent longer than made sense, as if listening. Those pauses were not empty. They felt like attention. When the fog came back to that stretch in early winter, and the horn went odd with its long and too short code, she found the white post at 52 without looking for it. She pulled into the turnout. She saw the tender's window bloom warm. The arms played their hesitant game, then kept their end of the agreement. Something passed, unseen, and permitted. The voice she had come to think of as the bridge speaking for itself matched the horn on the return to even and said the same simple phrase into the air they all shared. Thank you. She answered by touching the wheel with 2 fingers, a small, private courtesy. Then she went on. Story number 6. Cal brushed the high plains in late winter, a measured line of headlights moving through a landscape that could be a blank page when it wanted to be. The highway lay straight enough to make a person forget it ever turned. Snow fences stood at tidy intervals, long russet slats catching the wind's talk. His trailer was a dry van loaded with paper goods light compared to steel, fussy in crosswind, content if given steady cadence. It was the hour when farm lights become small constellations far apart, when grain elevators stand like dark cliffs, when the radio band thins to a low wash of voices talking about weather and not much else. He kept the state road report open on his phone, muted but visible. Red blocks, yellow notes. A few green lines holding on. A winter weather advisory scrolled calmly across the bottom. Gusts up to 40, ground blizzard possible. No precipitation falling, just snow already on the ground deciding to stand up and run. He passed a snow gate, one of those hinged arms with a big reflective stop sign that the highway department can drop across the lanes to close the road when the world goes white. It was raised. The overhead message board a mile later said, "No travel advised visibility variable." He had seen those words before. He knew what they asked. Patience, good judgment, no heroics. His dash clock read 27. The temperature sat just below freezing, the kind of number that lets ice toy with surfaces without deciding to make an event of it. The first wave of ground drift arrived as a playful thing. It pushed across the asphalt in pale bands like lace laid down and lifted. laid down and lifted again. His headlights caught it and threw it forward. A bright ribbon flung by someone ahead that always refused to be caught. He eased his speed by 5, settled his hands a little heavier on the wheel, and made room for his own caution. The CB murmured with the usual late-hour voices. A pair of drivers arguing gently about the best pie near a different highway. Someone singing 2 lines of a song and then letting it go. A check-in about a scale house miles behind. Then a tone slipped in soft, single, clean. Not an alarm, not a siren. A tone like a fork tapped gently against thick glass. It lasted half a breath and stopped. The radio followed with a voice as plain as a printed instruction sheet. Whiteout Protocol 9, initiating between markers 112 and 96. Eastbound units in the corridor, hold lane. Maintain 2 markers. Do not stop on open grade. Snowgate will lock behind last unit. Oh, Cal glanced down and then back up, quick as a blink. He had never heard of anything called Protocol 9 in this state. He ran a thumb along the worn seam of the steering wheel cover and watched his world reduce to the couple hundred feet of pavement he could see and the measured glow of reflectors standing their posts at the edge. Ahead, a faint orange breathed at low height, and then another, spaced far. Amber bars, not bright like a trooper's warning, but soft and deliberate, like lanterns on a path in a park. He would have taken them for maintenance pickups parked on the shoulder if they hadn't moved as 1, 3, then 4, easing forward at the same pace, leaving the right lane open as if waiting for someone. A text arrived on his phone's road report app and slid away before he could read it. Outside, the wind settled a notch, as if drawing in breath to speak. The amber lights signaled left in a ripple. Cal mirrored them. The group drifted onto the center line and then into the left lane, leaving the right shoulder completely clear. The snow fence to his right found its voice, a holy whispering rush. The ground drift lifted from playful to contrary. It curled up and threw itself at the grill like handfuls of paper. Eastbound white box, with blue chevron and tall top rail, the voice said, the same tone as before. You're number 5. Keep 2 markers off the right, 1 off the left. Low beams, 31 miles per hour. Do not stop for drift walls. Maintain spool. His van bore a blue chevron sticker at the rear barb of the trailer company branding, a small flourish on a practical machine. Plenty of companies had similar marks. He could have been anyone, but the words behaved like a hand on his shoulder. The amber lights showed themselves to be plows too, with tall wedges throwing snow cleanly, one behind with a rotary that looked like a great steel sunflower chewing and spinning, sending a white fan safely into the ditch. The pattern was old and precise, like a drill a crew knows by heart. Cal settled behind the last one and felt, in a way that was not entirely reasonable, protected. The world closed in. The whiteout that hunters of such things sometimes call living fog decided to live. It took the horizon and brought it within arm's reach. It made all the usual landmarks into ideas. The only solid pieces left were the lane under his wheels, the steady amber ahead, the rhythm of reflectors. The ground drift clawed at the gaps under the yane. Trailer, then broke and ran in the opposite direction, tricked by the plow's work into forgetting its plan. They passed a marker that, if he had been able to see, would have read 112. He saw only the outline for an instant, white on white. The voice in the radio spoke from a place that felt both far and close. Maintain spacing. Snowgate closing behind last unit. Do not stop for taillights beyond 2 lengths. In his mirror, he saw a low red glow blink in sequence 1, 2, 3, then hold. Behind him, out of the white, a gate arm had dropped across the lanes where no one could now pass. It hadn't clapped hard. It had simply fallen like a polite curtain at the start of a performance. The corridor moved. The plows worked without flourishes. Their amber lights pulsed in a slow heartbeat. On. Pause. Cal matched their speed and kept his beams low. High beams in a whiteout only make a person feel like they are inside a snow globe. Someone has shaken too hard. Low beams, keep the road close and honest. The voice gave them small, necessary things. Right bend at 109, lee side increases, keep 2 posts, resist the urge to follow the fence. That last line made sense to anyone who had ever driven in a whiteout near a snow fence. The fence's shadow, the way its slats shape the drift, can make the mind lean toward it. The advice kept his wheel straight. They passed a stand of cottonwoods he had seen in summer, a long shelter belt planted generations ago to comfort soil and wind. In winter, their black bones on the white are a painter's pleasure. Tonight, he saw only the nearest trunks, as soft, dark suggestions, each marked with a gut-level glow from tiny reflectors someone had tacked at about chest height. The reflectors were not standard highway issue. They looked like flattened tin circles polished by years of ice. Each blinked once when his lights found them, and then was gone. A little applause for staying within the lee air those trees gifted to the lane. The plow's rotary threw a steady white ribbon rightward that vanished into the blur with neat obedience. In the brief, clear triangle behind the machines, the road felt like a room inside a storm. Cal listened to the tires, the hum that tells a person whether their weight sits where it should, the small, almost musical rip of spindrift against rubber. "Eastbound number 5, the radio said, and the fact that he had been counted as such made him settle deeper into his task. "Short narrows where the cut steepens at 105. Hold your line. Wind will try to talk you into stopping. It doesn't know your load." The voice had a way of turning a sentence that made it sound like a kindly scold from an elder who had taught many people the same careful thing. They hit the narrows. The cut through a low ridge created a wind tunnel. The ground drift rose as if pulled by a string. Cal felt the whole truck shiver once, as even a well-trimmed rig will do when air shears suddenly across its sides. The rotary ahead of him spat hard. The amber bars burned a shade brighter, and then returned to their patient pulse. He held 31. He kept the posts on his right, exactly where the voice had told him to keep them. The narrows passed. The wind, chastened by its failure to bully a few measured minds, relaxed a little. Every few miles, a figure appeared faintly at the lane's edge, standing, glove raised. For a half-second each time, Cal thought of a person needing help. Then the figure resolved into a tall, narrow post, with a square of reflective material that made a man-shaped flare reflected in 1,000 tiny beads. Beside one, a little sign sat on a stake, neat as a label on a shelf, 102. The numbers counted down. He found it calming despite the fact that he could not see 90% of the world those numbers promised. They came to a low overpass, the old kind with poured railings and solid beef in its crossbeam. The wind used such structures to make music with the snow. As they passed under, an odd hush dropped. Then a soft, long note rose like a breath caught in a bottle. The radio asked for low throttle there, not because of ice, but because noise reflects under concrete and drivers can mistake it for a mechanical complaint if their nerves are tight. It was an instruction to go gently for the sake of their own hearts, as much as the truck. At 100, the world tried an old trick. A white wall appeared, not of fog but of drift. Wind. Concentrated snow piled across the lanes like a dune. It looked solid as stone if you only looked for a second. The plows did not look for a second. They took it at their practiced angle. The wedges shoved through. The rotary roared and made its pretty fan. The drift sighed and shrugged aside. The callers of caution on the radio always say this bit in the same considered cadence. Do not stop for drift walls. The road keeps its own geometry under there. The drift wants you to forget. After the wall, a stretch without fence opened, just flat ground to a far fence line if the horizon had been allowed back. The corridor pulled itself a little closer, like people do in a hallway when movement outside becomes an unknown. The amber pulse held the pace. The voice offered them a small comfort. Trees on the left begin again at 98. Wind will go quiet like someone walking out of a room. Don't overspeed when it does. Let the quiet be what it is. Cal had learned those same lessons in other storms. Hearing them soothed him more than he expected. He passed 98, and the left went dark differently, cottonwoods and poplars doing the work their planters had dreamed for them. The wind, for a strip as wide as the patience of a long-dead farmer, diminished to a polite stir. They crossed an old section line road, invisible except for a pair of wind-worn signposts with no signs attached, their boards long stolen by years. The rotary's fans swirled around the bare poles and made a small, cheerful comet tail. Cal saw the outline of a low building beyond the left trees, maybe an old schoolhouse or a shed. A single square of it reflected back for a blink. Someone long ago had mounted a bit of mirror in a window frame. It looked like a small eye that approved of the night's work. Gate ahead, the voice said. Not ours. Ignore it. You'll feel the road tip left and right twice. Shallow. That's the old drainage. The field to the right is hungry for vehicles when there is no horizon. Keep 2 posts. They reached the second snow gate. It stood across a rural cross lane that someone had once tried to make into a shortcut. The gate bore a padlock and a ribbon, and a sign that quoted ordinance by number about fines for cutting chains. It was not meant for them. It did what it needed to do. They did not give it more attention than it was due. The road tipped left and right as promised, and he let his hands make the correction without his mind writing a paragraph around it. At 96, the radio gave a subtle shift in tone, the way a person does when they know a hard part is ending, and they can afford warmth. Good run. Watch the lee side as we peel you off. Maintain separation at release. Trooper will sit eyes on for those who need a shoulder. Fuel at the basin is open. Coffee's decent. The corridor eased right, as slowly as it had begun, as if turning big things in a white world required more permission than it had at first asked for. The amber bars peeled from the left lane to the shoulder, and then into a turn pocket Cal had not noticed before in any other weather. The highway's right-of-way there was wide, a fan of pale space. As the plows angled off, the white returned in honest sheets, but without the same hunger. It was just weather again, not weather plus the pressure of a broad open whose only limit was patience. The first snow gate on that end far ahead in the deep breath of white was down. A trooper sat with no lights spinning, only headlights cutting a sensible wedge. He did not wave them faster. He did not toss his hands. He watched, posture settled. One by one, the corridor's units rolled past. The trooper tipped 2 fingers from the wheel for each, a small equal hello. Cal answered without thinking, his own hand lifting and setting down. He put on his signal and slid into the widened approach to a basin station, one of those low, long buildings that serve both pumps and soup. A windsock out front stood at half-mast, a limp orange flag deciding whether to act. The parking lot had been cleared in tidy rectangles. The drift lines between them looked like whipped cream spread with a straight edge. Inside, the light was warm and patient, bulbs the color of toast instead of white. A clerk in a thick sweater counted out till cash into an envelope, lips moving. Another tall man in a reflective jacket held a paper cup with both hands, as if confirming it would not fly away. Cal asked how the stretch behind had treated people. The clerk glanced up, eyebrows slightly raised the way people do when they are relieved a question contains no complaint. Whiteout curled up nasty by the ridge, he said. I was listening to the scanner. Sounded like they ran a 9. He saw Cal's blank. Protocol, he added. Special route behind the plows. They don't always do it. Nights like this, they will. Gets folks between the gates. Folk make bad choices if they feel they've been left. The crew knows the trees and where the snow lies quiet. How long they've been doing that? Cal asked, because gentler parts of the world have histories you can only learn by asking at counters. The clerk shrugged like a man carving wood with a pocket knife. Long enough that my aunt says her father did it in a different truck with round lights. Long enough that my cousin says they don't do it anymore on paper. Officially, they close it and call it a night. But if the crew is out and someone is in the teeth, they'll run people to the next basin. They don't put it on the site. It breaks a rule to keep a promise. Cal paid for coffee and stood a moment by the window while his rig breathed little clouds from its stack in rhythm. His phone had 3 texts waiting from the road app. He opened them. The first, time-stamped at 2:09, read, Whiteout Protocol 9, active EB 112, 96, maintain spacing. He had missed it arriving. The second, 2:26, release at 96, winds easing. The third, 2:28, Snowgate lowered 112, troopers advising no travel behind. A mechanical summary of human care. He put the phone away. Back in the cab, he scrolled the dashcam. The footage showed the world as he had felt it, a living white that accepted the suggestion of a lane and sometimes backed away from it in the form of plumes. The plows showed in it as amber smears more often than actual shapes. The radio audio file did not capture the precise tone that the live wave had held. It recorded only the words, stripped of their weight and place, which made them sound fainter than their care deserved. He did not send the clip anywhere. He filed it the way people file a recipe they might not need often, but will be glad to have when the one night arrives that asks for it. He took a short nap in the sleeper, with the engine ticking a soft lullaby. When he woke and rolled on, dawn had unfolded itself as a dull pewter that the land wore well. The snow fences looked like pages half-turned by a gloved hand. The cottonwoods near 98 stood in clean, daylit geometry, their trunks astonishingly straight. At 100, the drift that had made a wall was a smooth, hard sculpture scaled down to barely a ripple by the plow's insistence. At the old section line, the pads of the signposts cast blue shadows as narrow as pencils. He passed a maintenance yard where the plows, or plows like them, sat in a row, orange paint, clean despite the work. The rotary's maw was shut, pedals closed. A crewman in a stocking cap hosed salt and snow off a truck's undercarriage with care, like washing a dog after a long run through muddy fields. He looked up, met Cal's glance, and raised his chin once. Cal returned the nod, nothing more. By noon, the wind had changed to the kind that seems to have had its say and is ready to take its hat and go. The message board said simply, "Use caution." The snow gate at 112 stood open, as if it had always been. The reflectors returned to being small, boring jewels. The road resumed its old story about time and distance and miles in their place. Weeks later, on a clear night when stars had the sharpness cold lens to them, Cal crossed that stretch again. The message board was dark. The fences made their long, straight gestures. He thought he saw a tiny flash at chest height on a cottonwood. The flicker of a tin circle pressed to bark. He could not tell if it was real. It did not matter. He kept 2 posts on his right and 1 on his left out of habit anyway, held steady at a decent pace, and imagined the old shelter belt breathing out in small, satisfied waves as a truck passed quietly, kept to the lane, and asked nothing more than a little lee air and a patient escort made of wind and wood and practiced hands. At a diner later, someone told him a story that had the shape of his own, but with names changed, roads different, and the plows described as, with the really old lights, you know, the kind that look like pumpkins. He smiled without correcting details. The world keeps certain motions safe by telling them out of order. On the worst nights after that, if he found himself between the raised arms of 2 snow gates with the sky pulled low by wind, he would listen as carefully as he knew how. Sometimes the radio stayed quiet. Sometimes it played a game of static and faraway music. And sometimes, out of the hush, a single tone would brush the air, a glass rim touched just once, and a voice would come, speaking with care about markers and lanes, and the peculiar habit the planes have of making a road into a room that moves. He would do what it asked. He would keep his speed at the number it gave, even if that number felt slightly silly. He would not stop for a drift that wanted attention. On the good nights after that, he would pass the same markers under a mild sky with nothing stirring but a fox on a field edge. He would look down at the lane stripes bright and untroubled, and think of amber lanterns, tin circles, and the way a corridor can be made of trucks and breath and a landscape's memory of people who planted rows of trees, so a person they would never meet could drive a straight line in a hard wind and arrive with everything still in its place. As the last echoes of the highway fade into the stillness, remember some roads never let go of the souls that cross them. The stories you've heard tonight continue to drift through the darkness, carried by the wind and the hum of distant engines. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few who can face the night without flinching. Don't forget to like this video, share your city and the time you're listening in the comments, and subscribe to The Sleep Haunt, where every mile holds another whispered secret. Sleep well, if you can.